Good morning. It's 8 o'clock and we're at the intersection. And it's so great to see everybody with us today. We're going to open it up a little bit for some announcements before we get our briefing on the San Antonio Poverty Report. Does anybody have announcements? Michael, somebody is supposed to be here from the food bank. I think it's Kelly. So when you see her come, we'll jump into that. But do we have any announcements this morning? I have one that I want to announce for this evening. I've announced it before, but I'm going to do it again. Neighbor to Neighbor is the title of a community conversation this evening at 6:30 to 8 p.m. It's going to be at the Alamo College's District Administrative Offices, which is at 2222 North Alamo. It's right near that where Alamo hits Broadway. So it's at 5-point kind of intersection there. It's going to be a community conversation on how do we talk with our neighbors, however we define that, in compassionate ways during conflicted and challenging times and moments. It's being convened and called forth by the San Antonio Peace Laureates. So I really encourage folks to come tonight. Again, the doors will open at 6. The actual conversation is 6:30 to 8. There will be some light refreshments in case you need to like stretch a little bit between wherever you're coming from and then wherever you would be going. So hope you're able to make it tonight. I'll put that information in the chat again so that you can find it. Any other announcements?
And I'm representing the food bank. Kelly couldn't make it this morning.
Oh, great. So John, you go. It's all yours.
Yeah, so Feed SA is ramping up. Viva Amor is the theme this year. And we're really taking on partners right now for people to become champions to champion this effort. And so part of what I imagine we'll hear in the poverty report today is that there's a lot of need in the city. And we know that the number that we've talked about here is 20 million meals this summer. And so we're trying to raise those, and we need partners to step up and be champions. And so we've made it easy. I'll drop a link in the chat in a moment where you can sign up to become a Feed SA champion. And we just got reason you would sign up to be a champion. But at the same time, it's a nice benefit.
One of the things in the meeting the other day, John, that you said, and I'm going to let you repeat, but if you help sell t-shirts at $25, how many meals is that?
Yeah, if you sell t-shirts at $25, that is roughly 84 meals for the food bank. And so if you sell a t-shirt, it's 84 meals. And that people like t-shirts, and $25 is not a bad price for a t-shirt. And so that's a really good way to raise meals with minimal effort. And so, yeah, this is, if you do want to sell t-shirts, that is also something that you are able to do. You can request a number if you sign up to be a champion to be able to do that.
Thanks. So if you could give a one-liner on Feed SA, what it is, maybe there are some people here who weren't at your briefing a couple weeks ago. So give us a one-liner. What is Feed SA?
Feed SA is a citywide initiative to raise food funds awareness for the San Antonio Food Bank and bridge the summer meal gap. And so we focused on that summer meal gap and restocking the shelves for the food bank because it is a time when so many food insecure children, very specifically, are in need. And as people of faith, of all different kinds of faith, one of the things that unites us is that I haven't met anybody who holds any kind of faith who thinks that people should not have food, right? Feeding people is a part, and serving our neighbor, especially in the just the basic of something that you need to survive, is something that every faith holds. And so it's a way that we can unite together as people of faith.
So Feed SA very much is, although any organization or whatever could participate, but it really is an effort to get the faith community involved in helping with those meals this summer. So thanks, Jen. I appreciate you being here this morning. Maybe one last other announcement, if there is one, then I'm going to turn it over to Laura.
I'll have one, Ann, if you'll have
Okay.
me. So sacred.org
Yes.
has been working on a housing stability portal that we are preparing to launch in sometime in April. We're doing a series of focus groups to try to get people's feedback on it. We'll give you an opportunity to use the portal. We'll give you some scenarios and ask you some questions, and you can help us make it better. So if you want to participate in one of those, we'd love to have you. They're all on Zoom. They last about 45 minutes. There are 3 of them scheduled in March, the 7th, the 13th, and the 20th. So 20 something, I'm not sure which day. And so but I'll put a link for the March 7th versions, March 7th at 2 p.m. You can register for that on Zoom. If you would rather do a different one, you can contact me and I'll send you the links for the other dates. But if you want to participate, we'd love to have you.
Thanks. I tell you that Sacred just keeps growing and moving, right? Helping and serving. So I'm going to hand this over to one of my teammates, my colleague, Laura Serrano. And she helped put this poverty report together. And Laura, didn't you present it yesterday at City Council?
Patrick did. The assistant director presented.
But it was presented just yesterday to council. So we're getting it pretty close to hot off the press. Do we even have that anymore? Hot off the press. Yeah. Okay, so Laura, I'm going to hand it over to you. It's all yours. Thank you for being with us.
Of course. First of all, thank you. Thank you for inviting us. And it's with me today, one of my team members, Ronnie Wilson, who has been key in the preparation of this report that we are ready to share with you. I'm going to ask Anne or Sonia, if we get too much into the weeds, just let me know, because you know that we can be very excited about our numbers. I don't see if you see my screen. Can you see the presentation, the front page of the presentation?
Yes, we can see the PowerPoint.
Okay.
Thank you.
I will keep it this way. Okay, so we have prepared the status of poverty report. This is not a one-time exercise. So the department monitors the socioeconomic characteristic of the residents for various reasons. As you can imagine, it's a key component of the definition of our programs. So we have conducted the first poverty report in collaboration with another department, Metro Health, in 2019. Then an update was prepared in 2022, and this last update that we just released this week contains data from 2022. So there is a 2-year delay based on when the Census Bureau releases the data. One interesting thing of this report is that it covers the impact of COVID. So it's a reflection of the reality in our community after the crisis that the pandemic represents. The report uses as the measurement of poverty what's called the official poverty measure. This is the measure that the U.S. Census Bureau established, is the threshold of income established by the Census Bureau across the 50 states in the United States. It doesn't change state by state. It's the same one for every place in the country, which has pros but also cons, as you can imagine, because the cost of living is not the same in Maine than in Texas or in San Antonio and in New York, for example. And this is a summary. The thresholds are defined based on household size. So for a household of 1, it's considered someone living in poverty if that individual earns less than $15,225. For a family of 4 with 2 adults, which is important, 2 adults, 2 dependents, the threshold is $29,678. There are other measurements of poverty that you might have been familiar with. The federal poverty guidelines, the federal poverty line, it's built on these measurements, but has some adjustments, and it's used mostly for program eligibility. Many of you probably are familiar with that 100% of the federal poverty line, 200% of the federal poverty line. It's based on this data, but it has some adjustments, and it has slightly different numbers by family size. And there's another measurement that's commonly used, is the area median income, that's mostly used for housing eligibility subsidies that is based on the income in the metropolitan statistical area. If any of you have interested in digging a little bit more on the different ways of measuring poverty, just let us know and we will be very happy to have that conversation. So the overview of the data. So San Antonio has an estimate of 17.7% of the residents within the city limits living below that poverty threshold. That represents more or less 250,000 residents. So there is a margin of error, but it's not very big because we decided to use a very stable data set. That's the 5-year estimates. This data is based on the American Community Survey, 5-year estimates. What you can see in this chart is that San Antonio is not the poorest city. It's not the city with the highest poverty rate in the state of Texas. Houston has a higher percentage, and in numbers, the estimated individuals is significantly higher than San Antonio. San Antonio ranks very close to Dallas, but overall, San Antonio has a significantly higher poverty rate than the national average of 12.5%. I don't know why my mouse is not helping me this morning. Okay. One thing that we are very interested in looking at is the poverty reduction, because we understand the goal of our department and most of you as that effort to reduce poverty rates. And this is where it's we encounter less or little alarming information, where we can see that this table shows the comparison of the data set between 2013 and 2017 to 2018-2022. So it's over a 10-year period how poverty was reduced in our community. You can see that San Antonio reduced poverty at a slower rate than any other city in the state of Texas. So Dallas has been able to do a much better job than us. Houston even, it's better than us. We barely move the needle. When we get into the demographic characteristic of those living in poverty, we encounter that there are certain demographic groups that are overrepresented among those living in poverty, especially African Americans, American Indians, and Native Hawaiians. The group of Native Hawaiians in San Antonio is very small, but 21% of them are in poverty. 21% of American Indians in our community live in poverty. 23% of African Americans in our community live in poverty, which are above the 17.7 average percentage for the entire community. When we look at the characteristic of poverty by age, and this is one of the big red flags for us also as a department serving youth and children, is that San Antonio has a very high rate of children living in poverty, which faces us in front of many families with dependents not making enough money to cover their basic needs. 27% of children under 5 live in poverty in San Antonio. I want also to ask you to look at the older adults group, because that is a rate that it's increasing. As you can see in this chart, comparing how poverty has changed among age groups over that same period of time, 2013, 2017, 2018, 2022, we can see that we are reducing poverty among each age group. Under 5, almost 2.6 percentage points, 18 to 38 years old, almost 2 percentage points, but poverty is increasing among older adults. This is the only age group that has a negative trend in reduction of poverty. And it has many reasons, but this is an alarming national trend. And I think we should start looking more into what's going on with aging in poverty and the additional layers of vulnerability that represents housing instability, difficulty to access medical care, paying for the pharmaceutical needs, etc., food insecurity. When we dig a little bit deeper into the household characteristics of those residents that are not making enough money to make ends meet, we see that a vast majority of the people living in poverty are families. Almost 75% of those that are experiencing poverty are households with dependents. And out of those households with dependents, 62% are single parent households with only one income, right? And as you can imagine, a vast majority of those are single woman headed. So 50% of those households, more than 50% of those households are led only by a woman with dependents. And San Antonio has, as any other place in the country, a higher rate of women living in poverty than men. I have to say that the gap, what we call the gender poverty gap in San Antonio, is smaller than in other places across the country. Is smaller than in Fort Worth, is smaller than in Dallas, but it is still relevant that women have a higher rate of poverty than men. And somehow we need to look at the income, right? What is the income growth? How the income has grown, median income, right? In our community over that time. $5,000 a year. In San Antonio, the growth is smaller, even is smaller than in Texas, right? So we grew from an income perspective at a slower rate than Texas and the country. And if we compare San Antonio to cities like Fort Worth, the gap is huge. The difference is very important. And right. And I want to bring this because it triggers a reflection for us about what we call the working poor. So a significant percent of people working in San Antonio are in poverty. 34% of those residents that are considered living below the poverty measure are workers. So it's not that they don't make enough money because they are unable to work. That is the other part of this chart. 58% are not in the labor force, either because they have a disability, a permanent condition, they cannot work, whatever their circumstances are. 58, not in the workforce. 8% unemployed. They are trying to work, but they don't have a job. But 34% of the people living in poverty are workers, but not making enough to get above that threshold. And one thing that it's interesting for us is to compare San Antonio to other cities across the state of Texas from an income perspective. And this chart shows you the percentage of residents that are earning less than $50,000 a year with the percentage of residents earning more than $150,000 a year. While we can see that San Antonio is close to Houston in the lower part of the band, we are significantly shorter in the upper part of the band. So we are a less rich community overall if we compare it with other cities across the state. These income disparities are very, very acute when we look from a gender perspective. This chart shows you the difference between every dollar that a man makes with the amount of money that a woman makes by education in the United States, in Texas, and in San Antonio. So in San Antonio, a woman that only make up to 66 cents per every dollar a man makes. This is a big thing for us to start looking into. How can we address that gap? Because remember, the majority of those households living below poverty are single women, head of households, are single mothers. There is a very clear correlation between poverty and education, as all of you know clearly. And in this pie chart, you can see that there is a significant percentage, more than 60% of those residents living in poverty, that they have a high school degree or none. So this is the big part of the chart. But there are still people with some college education. 25% of those living in poverty that have some sort of college education that are still not making enough money to meet their needs. And we intentionally look into the disability status because the people with disabilities are overrepresented among those in poverty. 23% of people with disabilities are in poverty, while the city average is 17.7%, as we presented in the first slide. A third of the population 16 years and older with a declared disability are employed, right? But a significant part of those with disabilities cannot work, are not even in the labor force. And those that are working, half of them, they don't even make more than $25,000. This is something that really, I believe, requires a community effort to address these gaps. This is a summary of the data, but what I really would like to do is invite you to dig deeper, and I'm going to stop sharing here to share something. I don't know how to do this right. Sharing. Okay, I'm going to do something. Can you see this screen now with the beautiful hearts that Anne put together in front of the City of the Americas?
Yes, we can.
Okay, okay.
Sacred.org also helped with that. But
this is the front page of our poverty dashboard. So we did that report that has more in-depth analysis, but all this information and a little bit more, it's included in this website, that it's the status of poverty in San Antonio. I kindly invite you to visit it because you can scroll and analyze certain different aspects. What is the status of poverty? Get to analyze better the geographical disparities across census tracts in the city. It has more information across this comparison between the different cities. And it has a section by some of the key topics that we would like to look into it. There is no section dedicated to food insecurity because this dashboard can take you to the physical and mental health dashboard that the Metro Health Department has, that has a lot of good information around that. But you can dig deeper into homelessness, accessibility, education. But I want to invite you to dig deeper into this section that we call vulnerabilities, because one key component in our analysis is trying to understand that poverty is a very complex issue where different layers of vulnerability intervene. This is not just about income. It is much more than that. And we have been able to grasp a little bit of that through a community survey that we conducted in 2023. You can see the results here. Well, we clearly see the interconnection between lower income and discrimination, lack of health, lack of safe environment, even lack of networks of support. The survey has very interesting information about accessibility to services. And I will say this to you, you can be very proud because the results of the survey showcase that the number one place to go for help in this community are the faith-based organizations, even above family and friends, which is unlikely. In most of the other communities across the country, family and friends always ranks number one as the place where you go for help. In this community, our faith-based organizations are the first to go place for assistance, which puts you as a key role in addressing the socioeconomic disparities that our residents are facing. And I'm going to summarize briefly some of the key findings and just leave it open for conversation. Sorry if I took too much time. So San Antonio is not the poorest city in the state of Texas. It is important to say that because I don't think that alarming messages are going to help us to work steady and consistently to address this issue. But we reduce poverty at a slower rate. So I think that we need to have conversations about a strategy, about accessibility to services, about cross-collaboration across programs, about building San Antonio as a continuum of care where our residents don't feel lost in the system. Because multiple vulnerabilities affect low-income residents. It's not just that one agency can address their needs. It is that continuum of care that will address the complexity of the reality that our residents are looking at. We definitely need to look at those demographics that are highly vulnerable, people with disabilities, children, women, older adults, African Americans. We cannot forget that housing affordability is a problem, and it is not just a problem of availability, it's accessibility also. Can our residents access housing? Are the criminal records hampering them? Are the regulations of the system putting some additional barriers to access affordable housing? It's a complex reality, right? This is a reminder about the high rate of single women, head of households that are living in poverty. And we recognize that we need to work more on accessing social services, because we identify in our survey that lower income residents, they don't really know sometimes where to go for help. And I'm gonna stop here, and because I can talk and talk for a very long time, and I don't wanna take more of your time. Sharing.
Well, it was just the perfect amount of time, Lotta, just so you know. So we're at 8:25, and I'm going to pause just for a second in case some of us need to move on to our next thing. We try to go from 8 to 8:30 and get as much information as we can in there, and then go into conversation. So if you're needing to leave, thank you for being with us this morning. And I don't know about the rest of you. I'm going to encourage you. We're going to do that thing where we all open up our microphone. But I don't know about you, but I am most grateful to learn about and discover people like Lotta and Ronnie that are working within our city structure for us. I don't know if you're as impressed with Laura's work as I am, but I am grateful. So I invite everybody just to open up your mics and in some way clap, express thanks, whatever it might be, so they can actually hear the sound of the community.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you, Laura. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We don't get enough thank yous. And I know for somebody who spent most of her working life, in community, but then to come and work within the city structure, that has been its own learning experience, for better and for worse. But the better part of it is all the people that I have met, all those that I work with in the city structure, and they do it out of full commitment for the greater good. So it's been my honor to introduce Lotta to you today. And I don't know, Lotta, if you want to say something about Ronnie, and because I know he was with us.
I want him to put the camera so people can see him, because he's a key component on this. Okay, that's what I want. Thank you.
Yeah. So Ronnie, we would love to see your face. I also have to tell you, during some stressful times in the faith-based initiative, it was Lotta and Ronnie who would keep me going. Me trying to deal with the bureaucracy. They stayed compassionate and caring with me. So I'm very grateful. So I want to open it up now for questions or comments. I think we'll just go ahead and raise hands if that works for all of you. I hope there are some. I have not looked in the chat, but I see a number 21 there. So wow, that might reveal a whole bunch. Other than look, Ronnie, he got some shout out there. We've got some announcements in there. Great presentation. And we can also understand why sacred is so important to our community, getting those resource connections. And sacred is also in Spanish. So that is also important to know. When we, here we got the poverty. I'm just scrolling through the chat. Karen Ball has her hand up. Karen, you want to ask a question?
Yes, Laura, thank you very much for the presentation. I actually have a question in terms of where efforts should be targeted to remediate these poverty levels we're seeing. I put in chat that there's 30 states this coming Saturday that are marching on their capitals. Texas is one of them. And I put the stats in. And we live in a state where public education is heavily under attack at the moment. So where do you suggest that strategy be focused? At the state level to make sure that public schools are fully funded? Or is this, should we be focusing locally in terms of addressing those issues?
That's a heck of a question. That is a so I think we look at the poverty from a community perspective. So the characteristics of poverty in San Antonio are very different than the characteristics of poverty in Austin or in Houston or in Dallas. So, but we have some recommendations in the report that I'm trying to put the link specifically to the report, but I'll put it or I'll send it to one later. For us, one key component is the program's eligibility should be based on vulnerabilities of individuals, right? And that is important because there has been some conversations about the importance of focusing programs on certain geographical areas, and it is true that in San Antonio there is a key segregation across areas. But we have seen that over time that strategy hasn't been very effective. So our recommendation is make sure that when you prioritize always those residents that have multiple vulnerabilities intervening. Focus on the person, on the vulnerabilities of the client. A key component for us in our analysis is that we still see that low-income residents or residents with difficulties to deal with the basics, they get lost in the system. And that is our responsibility as social service providers to create a stronger network of support and make it easier for residents to navigate. And we had some conversations about that the other day when Bill presented the new Sacred portal, right? So an online resource is great, but what can we do more, or what else can we do to make sure that we help people navigate the system? There are resources out there, but some of them are underutilized because people get lost in the system on those thousands of eligibility criteria. I just mentioned at the very beginning the different criteria to measure poverty. Those are eligibility criteria. If on top of that we add the census tract where you live in, do you think that a person who's struggling with food insecurity knows in which census tract lives, how much federal poverty guideline fits in, or the area median income? You know, they don't know those eligibility. It's on us to help them navigate the system. And I really believe that we have to be on a stronger continuum of care as a community, where one entry point for services can open the door to whatever that individual needs, right? We didn't talk about education intentionally, but that's the thing that nobody seems to talk about, but there is a clear correlation of poverty and the geographical distribution of certain school districts. And that is a reality that probably you know better than me, where though there are certain areas, certain school districts that have a significantly higher rate of residents living in poverty. And probably it's not the responsibility of the school district, but the question would be, how can we empower those school districts to ensure that those kids are ready to overcome the generational poverty? But another key question for us is that we feel that we need to dig deeper into the characteristics of poverty in San Antonio, because the statistical data is showing us so much. The whys, the generational poverty, the persistent poverty, those are questions that are still unanswered for us. And our goal as a team with Ronnie and a new team member that recently joined is to dig deeper into that and try to see, is this generational poverty? What are the key factors? Are there cultural factors intervening? And there is so much more to analyze.
Thank you. Peter has his hand up.
Thank you, Ann, and thank you, Laura. Excellent presentation. And I was able to catch some of the presentation to the Planning and Development Committee, where Bill also spoke to Sacred, and wanted to make a comment and ask a question about the conversation that came out of that. And Ann, you've talked about resiliency and being holistic, and there's different types of resiliencies, but yet faith-based community is really, it's a gold standard. We're the gold standard, I think, for that in community. And the conversation was about having a one-stop shop, and we're talking about Sacred, but the recommendations that were made for the poverty report kind of spoke to that collaboration and community, and seeing more specifically how individual communities can have those type of resiliency hubs. They talked about libraries, or they could be schools that are being repurposed that would incorporate these different entities that become more user-friendly and become that contact point. Because as you mentioned, that's really the challenge, is who people trust and how they connect. And wanted to make that point of how they can be incorporated, these resources, into the community very specifically, with navigators that are collaborative and targeting those areas. And I know Sacred, of course, is really that point where you can really plug into the resources online. But can you speak to the recommendations that speak to that from the poverty report? I know you didn't have time to go into that, but just anything that kind of speaks to that type of work.
Definitely. We're really so we have to meet people where they are at, right? This is Peter. It was part of the conversation that happened the other day at the council committee. And that is key. So we cannot pretend residents that are already struggling with thousands of problems to go find us. It's for us to go find them. So for you all that are the first step, the first stop for residents that are struggling, it is key to know where to access those resources. I feel that us as a department, we don't do a great job promoting our own services, but Sacred is a key resource. So my only recommendation is go to those trainings, learn them, know how it's important, make sure that you know how to navigate Sacred, and make sure that staff in your churches, in your organization, knows how to use it, because it will be a way for us to help residents and to teach residents how to navigate the site. But there is also the 211 list of programs. Make sure that your services are listed there. Be vocal, advocate to list your resources in the United Way repository of social services. Engage with the Alamo Area Community Network, which is a platform for nonprofit entities and social service providers to provide referrals. Expand this philosophy that Anne has embedded in her mindset: collaboration, 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 collaboration.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Laura, too, for that affirmation. But I was sitting here thinking too, when we first began the faith-based initiative, which is now 7 years ago, we surveyed about 13,000 people, asking, like, what are your major community concerns? And we had close to 100, but there were, and I'm not going to be able to tell you the entire list, but there were 9 that were the largest and towards, the top number of community concerns. But the number one community concern was generational poverty, the number one. And that was 7 years ago. And, but it was also one of those, well, how do we do that? How do we address that? And what we ended up doing is really addressing the other 8, of which mental health, housing and homelessness, children, literacy, so education, but if you start to listen to that, you'll also see that those are some of those proactive, those key things to be working with in terms of addressing poverty. But I'm just rambling, just so you know, out loud, but I'm trying to think my way through. By the report, there was a really large number that clearly states that the strongest group of natural resource that addresses this, or where people go, is the faith community. So if we have that information, that also kind of puts a little more responsibility, Like, so how do we roll up our sleeves and be about this work and change the direction of it? So I'm inviting everybody just kind of into that question and thought. I think creativity, innovation, collaboration, we can make a difference when it comes to poverty, but I think we need to be focused on it and talking that way. So I'm going to hand it over to Bill. He's got his hand up, and I hope he rescues me out of my rambling. So Bill, it's you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I wanted to, I was at the briefing that on this past Tuesday when this information was presented to the City Council Committee, and a couple of things stood out to me. One is from the briefing, keep in mind that once you exit that in poverty level, you're not wealthy at that point, right? So a family of 40, family of 5 making $40,000. Once they make $42,000, they're no longer living in poverty. But that's a very minor comparison, right? So keep in mind of that. So, and also, if you really dive into the numbers, it doesn't take much to discover that nearly half of the children in the city are living in or very near the poverty level. And so think about that. Half of the children you see walking around at HEB, half of the children, 2 out of every 4, 1 out of every 2 that you see in your community is likely struggling to have a safe place to live and enough food. So, so the numbers are they get better, right? But it's dire. And so, secondly, for those of you that are kind of entrepreneurially minded or looking for innovative approaches, the conversation around, Sacred presented their one-stop shop, a virtual portal for finding assistance with housing stability, with mental health, with other things. The conversation by the City Council was primarily around how do we get, they want a physical one-stop shop. And originally the idea was to have a single place. Think of Haven for Hope, but for issues on housing, housing services. But at the meeting, Councilman Courage was talking about not just doing one, but doing these distributed throughout the community. He was talking about public libraries. He was talking about putting computers in these spaces, having Sacred available, having other services available on these computers, staffing them round the clock with people that could do this. He was throwing around budgets, in the 4 to 5 million range with 40 to 50 locations. So let that sink in a little bit. There's a councilman out there talking about producing funding in the 4 to 4 million range to put these resiliency hubs in place in 40 to 50 places throughout the community. If that's not an invitation to create something, I don't know what is. So this is an opportunity. The city is following up here. The city does not have to be the one to do this. The city can cause this to happen, but it doesn't have to be city staff sitting at those tables. And frankly, I think it would probably be more efficient if it wasn't city staff, if it was a liaison with the community and people that have that higher degree of trust with the neighbors than a city worker would. So I think there is a huge opportunity here for us to build something that is just remarkable and unparalleled anywhere else in the country.
And so, Bill, I'm going to raise an earlier conversation that we had during ARPA potential funding. And that's, I'm going very public, but it was the idea that everybody in San Antonio goes to HEB. More than the libraries, more than congregations, more than everybody goes to HEB, and they're ubiquitous. They're everywhere. So why aren't we putting up Sacred kiosk in those places? Why don't we have those community navigators in HEBs?
Yeah. That's a great question. There are small storefronts at the front of every HEB. Sometimes there's a bank or a flooring services or something like that. But why not have a resiliency hub in that HEB, or the same in a Walmart or any of these other places? There's an opportunity here, and there's going to be money, and there's going to be will in the next year from the public to get this done.
And it wouldn't have to be a large space in the HEBs, right? So enough of that. It's 8:44. Great conversation this morning, and I know it's moving us somewhere together. So I want to thank you all for being here, being together. I want to thank Lotta in particular for saying yes to this. with just a couple days notice, but I'm just grateful for the minds and the work that are happening in our staff within the city. And but I'm right on that page with Bill Neely. I think the community is the lead. The community is the lead. I hope to see some of you maybe tonight at the community conversation at the Alamo College's District Administrative Offices, 2222 North Alamo. Peace Laureates, San Antonio Peace Laureates will be leading a conversation on how we can be more compassionate with our neighbors. Doors open at 6. The conversation is 6:30 to 8, and there will be some light refreshments. See you again next week at the intersection. Take care, all. Thanks for being with us.